Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dive straight into one of the most intense, epic historical accounts of the 13th century. We're looking at Hulagu Khan's incredibly calculated, frankly brutal dismantling of the Ismaili mountain fortresses. We'll be pulling this all directly from the celebrated text, Juvayni's Tarikh-i Jahangushay. It's a source that gives us a fascinating front-row seat to what happens when an unstoppable military juggernaut collides with absolute, unyielding geography. It's really a story of intense psychological warfare, cutting-edge siege engineering, and ultimately the violent end of an era.
Right out of the gate, the historical source sets these staggering stakes for us. Just listen to the phrasing here. The author describes these towering, star-scraping fortresses, built so high they literally seem to rub shoulders with the heavens. I mean, the Ismaili defenders genuinely believed their sheer altitude and these massive stone walls made them invincible. But they were about to face the Mongol war machine under Hulagu Khan, which the text vividly describes as an endless sea of weapons. The main takeaway here is just the sheer, terrifying scale of this clash. We are watching the ultimate immovable object meet history's most unstoppable force.
Okay, let's get right into Phase 1, the march and deception of Hulagu's advance.
So our timeline kicks off in the Islamic year 654 AH, and the source is incredibly meticulous here, tracking Hulagu's relentless, almost mechanized advance across the landscape. The march begins in mid-Shaban. By the 10th of Shawwal, he leaves Biskala-Dissi for a direct strike. And then, just 8 days later, bam, the full weight of his army arrives right at the gates of the Maymun-Diz fortress. This timeline is absolutely crucial because it highlights the terrifying speed of the Mongol forces. They weren't just some wandering horde, right? They were a highly organized, rapidly deploying military unit. Now, you can imagine the panic on the other side. Desperate to halt this advance, the Ismaili leader, Rukn al-Din, starts throwing out these wild stalling tactics. He knew for sure he couldn't face the Mongols in an open field, so he's just trying to buy time. First, he promises he's going to willingly dismantle his own castles. Yeah, that didn't work. So then, he literally sends a fake 7-year-old boy, claiming it's his son, to be a hostage. When that fails, he just resorts to begging for a delay, hoping the harsh mountain winter will arrive and do the fighting for him. But the text really emphasizes Hulagu's sharp intuition here. Hulagu wasn't buying any of it. It notes that he immediately saw right through the fake son deception. He didn't even need hard evidence. The source tells us he just instinctively knew it was a total ruse. So rather than getting bogged down in these delay tactics, Hulagu uses the deception as fuel. It became his justification to ruthlessly escalate the whole campaign. He ships the fake kid right back and orders his armies to tighten the noose. Which brings us to part 2, crossing the Hazar-Cham and its incredible mountain perils. Think about trying to move a massive medieval army, horses, camels, heavy siege equipment, the whole shebang, through extreme, unforgiving geography. The source paints this highly visceral picture of the sheer physical danger here. It points out that the terrain was so incredibly perilous, so twisted and steep, that even nimble mountain goats and flying eagles would actively avoid it. To put that into perspective, the fact that the Mongols traversed this successfully just speaks volumes about their insane discipline and logistical brilliance. And the author uses some highly evocative, propagandistic language to describe it. He calls the Hazar-Cham Pass narrow as the Bridge of Judgment and as dark as the path to hell. By framing the geography in these literally apocalyptic terms, the text elevates the Mongols' survival of this march to a mythic status. It's telling the reader, hey, Hulagu's army isn't just defeating human enemies. They are conquering nature itself. They are passing through hell to deliver judgment. Having survived that deadly march, the armies converge for Chapter 3, the siege of Maymun-Diz, and the inevitable clash. To really grasp what we're looking at here, the text drops a staggering little detail. 12. That is how many years it originally took just to construct this colossal fortress. 12 long years of hauling heavy stone and mortar up an impassable mountain peak. The defenders were absolutely convinced that a fortress requiring over a decade of backbreaking labor to build up in the clouds could simply never be breached. Well, the Mongols had other plans, brilliantly illustrating the horrifying efficiency of their siege engineering. They didn't just sit outside and wait for them to starve. As they surrounded the fortress from all sides, they immediately got to work. The text describes them chopping down ancient towering trees nearby to build massive mangonels, these heavy siege engines, right there on the spot. They deployed massive bows with a 2,500 pace range put together by master craftsmen. And then
the sky just darkened. A relentless shower of heavy stones and arrows rained down on the fortress like a deadly hailstorm. Total shock and awe.
Now, as the walls are getting battered, Rukn el-Din's final desperate hope was the environment itself. He was praying for that notoriously harsh mountain winter to set in, which would freeze out and destroy the besieging Mongols. But the source notes an unusual, almost miraculous stroke of luck for Hulagu. The weather remained unseasonably warm. The snows that usually blanketed the peaks just melted away. The text frames this as divine favor smiling upon the Mongols, leaving the Ismailis completely exposed.
So, facing overwhelming firepower and no winter rescue, we hit part 4, the surrender of Rukn al-Din and his broken resolve. Seeing his inevitable destruction, Rukn al-Din finally breaks and requests terms of surrender. On the last day of the month of Shawwal, he comes down the mountain, submitting entirely to Hulagu Khan. But the text points out that not everyone gave up. A group of his most fanatical warriors, the Fidais, chose to hold out. They retreated to the highest towers and decided to fight to the bitter end. But, as you can probably guess, the Mongol war machine showed absolutely no mercy. Within days, those final holdouts were systematically and ruthlessly crushed. With the leader captured, the Mongol forces turned to their ultimate target in Chapter 5, the fall of Alamut, the very heart of Ismaili power. To truly understand how unprecedented Hulagu's victory was here, the author provides some really fascinating context. A previous mighty ruler, Sultan Muhammad bin Malik Shah, spent 11 agonizing years trying to besiege Alamut. 11 years. And he utterly failed. Hulagu Khan, on the other hand, rolls up and achieves swift, total destruction in a matter of days. This comparison is a very deliberate narrative choice by the author to really magnify just how unstoppable Hulagu was. And the text coldly, methodically details the absolute erasure of Alamut. After its surrender in late Dhul Qaeda, the Mongols didn't just occupy the fort, they completely dismantled it. They looted all of the stronghold's accumulated wealth, then set the remaining structures completely ablaze. The author uses this incredibly striking language, stating that the remains of this once impregnable fortress were literally swept away into the dust with the broom of destruction. Just like that, the physical and psychological heart of the Ismaili state was wiped off the map.
So as we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us pondering a pretty heavy question. What does history take away when seemingly impregnable fortresses, structures that took decades to build and were thought to touch the stars, are just reduced to dust in a matter of days? It really reminds us of the fleeting nature of seemingly invincible power, right? It shows us exactly what happens when the absolute peaks of human engineering meet a world-altering force like Hulagu Khan. It's a stark reminder that in history, no wall is truly impenetrable. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the source material, and as always, keep questioning the history behind the walls.